I assume you can hear me, is that right? Can you hear me? We're going to wait a few more minutes as more people can come in. We have a nice crowd, hopefully. And I'm going to save my voice as much as I can, because last week I had nasal surgery and I have a very limited talking voice. So we're going to wait a little longer for more people to come. So just enjoy the various music. Hi, Devora. Nice to see you back. Tabor, welcome. And Mark, welcome. And Rita, welcome. And Michael, nice to meet you and nice to see you. We're going to wait for some more people to come before we officially start the program. I'm glad we got you in, Tony. So I'm glad that we figured all this technology out. So we're going to be just waiting a few more minutes before we start officially to wait for anybody else coming. We're just going to play some more music and enjoy. Okay. Well, I want to officially welcome you to our very first Havurah session, and I'm so honored to have each of you join. I know that there will probably be some more people joining as we go on, but we're not going to wait for them. Life gets in the way, I can tell, in today's busy world. So I'm going to start off to kind of give you a little bit of a tech check. If you do lose your connection, just click the link that you originally clicked in to get back in, and I'll admit you. I'm admitting as well. And I want to say hello to my friends and my old people that I know, and I want to certainly make friends with those of you who I are seeing for the very first time. So Rita, welcome back. Rita and I share San Diego, and we are both in the San Diego Generations of the Shoah group. Mark Newhouse is a terrific sponsor and pioneer of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust group on Facebook, and now much broader than that. And he's presented his book, The Devil's Bookkeeper, several times to our group. And Devora Caspi is a survivor, and she may call herself something different. We'll hear that a little bit later. And she also is part of our Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance group, and has been an advocate and a great proponent of coming to our lively monthly events, and same with Mark. So I'm going to start off as I am the founder. I started in 2021 in this whole world of Holocaust, and I want to kind of start this. And the more we can kind of get to know each other and feel comfortable talking to each other, the more powerful this group is and will become. I can tell you something that happened this morning. We had a lively session this morning, a little bit larger than this, but not much. But we had someone from LA who came, and I did not know, and we had someone from Skokie, Illinois, who I did not know. And in the context of the program, they were starting to talk to each other because they had something triggered in their last name. And as it was verified, they determined that they had a genealogy connection to each other, and they didn't know each other prior to this. And so it was fabulous to watch the connection live in front of our eyes, that they would meet each other online. So you never know. This is a very small diaspora of survivors and survivors' children. You know, I often wondered as a kid why I was different. I didn't know, but I felt there was something different about me, something wrong with me. And I can date this all the way back to the 5th grade, when I was separated by the teacher into the good kids and the bad kids. And the bad kids were put in the back of the room, and I was a bad kid. I didn't do anything, but I was separated, and I was so traumatized by that, I refused to go to school. And my mother had to drag me the 2 blocks to school, and she didn't speak great English. And we became very friendly with the principal, because the principal had to intercede to get me back into school. Mrs. Hartman, I still can remember that name, if you can believe it. And I can remember the teacher's name was Dr. Fasanasha. So it was a crazy, crazy thing. But ever since then, throughout my life, I can remember difficulties leading eventually to when I was in business, having nightmares, and always the same reoccurring nightmare. I was always being interrogated by the Gestapo. And what's really weird about this is that neither of my parents, who were both survivors, ever spoke to us at all about their show-up experiences. In fact, they were happy to put it in the box, close the box, and only look forward. My mother was a survivor from Auschwitz with her 2 sisters and her father. She lost her mother and baby sister on the first day when Mengele told them to go left, and her mother wouldn't let go of her hand. My father was escaped from Nazi Berlin at age 15 on the last Hadassah Aliyot kinder transport to Palestine, and he lived in Palestine at age 16 alone, and eventually met my mother, who eventually came through Cyprus, which spent a year in Cyprus, if that was bad enough, to go through Auschwitz to get thrown into Cyprus, because she made it to Palestine and the British turned back her ship. I know all of this not from my parents, but in COVID, I started to think about why I was struggling with all of these things all my life. And I started to lean forward and learn about my parents' pathways. And I've done a significant amount of research, and I have a passion for film. So I sort of threw myself into, and I've now watched over 500 Holocaust films. It's a bit crazy, a bit over the top, but I have watched literally probably 5,000 films in my life, and I really enjoy films, and I'll probably watch 2 or 3 films every evening on Netflix or Amazon or one of the other dozen pay services that I get. So that's my story. And when I started to think about how do I learn about my parents' pathway without having the ability to ask, that has both my parents have passed, I thought Facebook would be a really great place to be able to meet people. And I spent a year researching, and it has been. And believe it or not, I never intended to have a Facebook group with more than 100 people in it. And we now have over 7,000 people all around the world, both on Facebook, both on YouTube, on Spotify, on Amazon, on Google. And we just launched the new jcrnow.com website, which I all have an advocate to go. So that's my story, and I wanted to be able to put it out there so that you also feel comfortable. But I only want you to share if you feel comfortable. And I'm going to go to Rita to start with, and let Rita tell you a little bit about herself, her parents. We have one survivor. Is everyone else a 2G? Or we have other survivors in the group here. So if you are some other survivor other than Havurah, would you raise your hand? Okay, so we're all 2Gs, right? Is that right? Yes? Okay, so go ahead, Rita.
Hi, everybody. I was born in Los Angeles. My parents came through America in 47. Both of them were born in Poland. My mother was born in Płock, which is north of Warsaw. And she and her sister were in 2 slave labor camps, Skorzysko-Kamienna and Częstochowa. And they were liberated in 45, and they went back to their hometown, to their apartment, and there was a Polish woman there who would not let them in, and they saw their mother's furniture and things through the door, but they couldn't. Anyway, they went to see if there was anybody alive, and they didn't find anybody right then, but they did eventually find a brother who had escaped east and had been drafted and had lost an arm in one of the battles in Russia area. And he made Aliyah because he married somebody who already had 2 sisters in Israel, but they came to Los Angeles because they had a half brother who had come many years earlier to Los Angeles. So they had each other, and that was a good thing. My father was born in Galicia, which was the eastern side of Poland, and it was annexed by the Soviet Union in 40 and invaded in 41. So he had been in this, he was born in a very, very small shtetl. I actually went in 2013 back. I went there, it wasn't back, but I went there to see the places where my parents were born. And in his shtetl called Bolshovci, the streets are not paved. There's no street signs. It's a very small place. And his father was a Melamed and had cheder in the house. And so they were poor. And so he went to the next town over where he had grandparents. It was Stanislavov, which now is Ivano-Frankovsk, or Ivano-Frankivsk, if you use the Ukrainian, because it's now Ukraine. And so he was not with his family when there was the invasion, and people started yelling, "Jump on the wagon, the Germans are coming." So he jumped on the wagon and everybody fled east, and he went all the way to Tajikistan. So he met my mother in Łódź after the war. What else do you want to know?
No, we'll go to the next. We have lots to talk about, but we're going to do it in stages. So I'm going to go next to Tibor, and if you can unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your parents.
I was born in 1929, 93 years old so far, in Czechoslovakia. It became a fascist republic, Slovak fascist republic, in 1939. I was 10 years old when I was kicked out of school, 12 years old when 1942, almost all my relatives were sent to Auschwitz, Opole, and Sobibor and murdered. At 14, we ran into the forest, lived for 200 days and nights under snow and ice, very high mountains, and survived it. I was 15 when I survived it, didn't go to school for 5 years, went back to high school, eventually studied chemistry, became a PhD in chemistry in Prague, in Czech Republic, what is now in Czech Republic. I worked for 20 years in that country, with a communist country, with all the dangers of being a Jewish in a communist country, which was not very popular, to be very mild about it. In 1968, I was sent to Cuba to fix glass factories in Cuba, and 9 months later, we were lucky to escape from a Cuban airplane in Canada. So we're flying back after 9 months to complete the 2-year assignment. And we lived 9 years in Canada, 4 places, and another 4 places in the United States, where I became I worked as a scientist and a technologist in glass field, and eventually spent 44 years as a scientist, and then after age of 68, I became an artist, and I was telling my story very thoroughly as an artist, painting it, sculpting it, and exhibiting all over Canada, America, and Europe also, particularly in the country I came from, and Prague in Czech Republic. Giving lectures, slideshow lectures, in 1 hour, about 150 slides, which means I gave 10 to 25 lectures a year for the last few decades. Last one about 2 weeks ago. This is my story. I live in Kingston, New York, state of New York. Kingston is a small town, about 20,000 people. And from there, we go all over. Recently, we even went to give a lecture to San Diego, California.
Oh, nice.
Here's my story.
So we're in Czechoslovakia. My mother's family was from Košice, Czechoslovakia, and she was deported. They were deported in 1945 from Košice, along with 18,000 others, to Auschwitz. So where were you born in Czechoslovakia?
I was born in a very small town. We call it town because it was county seat. 2,000 people totally, but they were big buildings and some statues and notary public, a hospital with two seats, two beds, and things like that, which means that it was a town. But it was about 50 miles from Auschwitz across a Polish border, very north of Slovakia. This is where I was born. My father was a Chazan, a shochet, and a cantor in English language, practically doing all rabbinical duties for about 100 families. All those families were deported in 1942, almost all of them, just few individuals left, like pharmacists. And my father, because he was in charge of burials, and if a Jew died, somebody had to bury him or her, which means that this was his trick to survive. And my mother was a teacher in charge of Jewish kids who were not deported yet, just few of them. But still, we were supposed to be deported in 1942 at the end of the year, after Slovakia would be Judenfrei, free of Jews or void of Jews. We somehow survived those 2 years, and then Germany started losing the war, and somehow we survived it till 1944, when we had to run into the forest because Germans took over Slovakia militarily, and it was SS and Gestapo, and no deals anymore, no hiding possible, and it was just, we lived like a forest animals for 200 days and nights under the snow and ice, very difficult. This was roughly that Orava district, Orava or Dolny Kubin, were roughly in the middle of the country, very north. Košice was very east. Košice became Hungary during those fascist period of Slovakia. And Hungary deported their Jews only in 1944, 2 years after Slovak Jews were deported.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was a little bit easier for Hungarian Jews to survive, or Jews who lived in Hungary, who escaped from somewhere else and lived there. I know the story about Košice, Kaschau in German, or simply it was a Hungarian town.
Okay, hold on a second. Why don't we go to Michael? Michael, can you unmute yourself? I want to learn about you, and I guess, and I'll ask you, Tibor, do you consider yourself a 2G or a survivor?
Oh, 100% survivor. I survived 5 years under the Nazis.
Okay, I just wanted to, I wanted to treat you with the respect that you deserve, and I wanted to make sure that I understood. So, Michael, can you unmute yourself? And we're seeing your hat right now, so we want to be able to see your face. And so just move back from the camera a little bit, and we'll be able to see you. There you go.
Hi, how's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. My name is Michael Mantell. I am a 3G. And I do apologize for the background. I'm actually at my friend's home. I just finished work, so I just came here so I can make it in time. So my paternal grandparents are from Romania. My grandmother from Satumar, my grandfather from Siget. And they are survivors. My grandmother was in Auschwitz for a short time, and she had a trajectory like most Romanian Jews. My grandfather was in a labor work camp, and he was separated from his family. He was in Chernovitz at the time. My understanding, he passed before I was born. He didn't really speak much about his experience. So I have a little bit more knowledge about my grandmother's experience. And then my grandfather and grandmother both moved back to, or came back to Romania, and I didn't find much there, and most of their family were murdered. So they moved to Israel. My father was born in Israel, and then in the 1960s, they came to the United States, to New York. I'm from New York, and on my mother's side, her family's from Poland, and the majority of them, or I shouldn't say the majority, those I know of, moved to the United States prior to the war. We've slowly been learning a little bit more about her family, particularly those who passed away prior to the Holocaust, and those who were murdered during the Holocaust. So kind of just trying to piece these puzzle pieces together little by little.
Okay. And where are you based now?
I'm in New York City, and
And what do you
appreciate this.
what do you do?
I'm a psychotherapist and also an educator. I work mainly in schools with children in the classrooms doing socio-emotional work or socio-emotional support. I also teach in Hebrew school, and I volunteer at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center in Nassau County on Long Island, and I run some programming that features Holocaust survivors and family members. Very grateful to have that connection.
And will you say
as
hello
well.
to Andrea Bollinger for me?
You got it.
We are good pals. So I'm going to
Oh,
go over.
beautiful.
I'm going to go over to Gary and Tony, and I want to maybe hear from both of you, or whoever is going to be the spokesperson for your tile. Or if you're not quite ready, tell me, and we'll move to the next person and catch back up with you. Oh, here comes Tony. Okay, unmute yourself, and then we'll hear from you. I'm so thrilled that you're back, and I'm so thrilled back that you were able to get on here today. So I screwed you up this morning, so sorry for that. We can't hear you, so you have to unmute yourself. You're still muted. So just try to unmute yourself and say something so we can hear you. You're still muted. So there, you want to hit the microphone. There you go. There you go. Go ahead, talk to us. No, I can't. Are you on a multiple device? Are you on two devices, or one device? Because we can't hear you.
Maybe
Okay.
it's the
There we
maybe
go.
the volume. The volume.
Okay, we can hear you now. Go ahead. Now it fades out, so I don't know what's going on. We heard you and now we don't. Okay, keep thinking
The
about
picture
it.
of a microphone,
There it
which
is.
crossed. Click on it.
Yeah, gonna try to do this for you, maybe. Okay, are you there? See, you're muted now. I can see your microphone is being muted. So if you can unmute yourself and talk. I'm sorry that we're waiting for you, but we got to try to make this work. Can't have two problems in the same day. Do you see that the microphone has a line through it in your desktop? So on the very below, on the very toolbar, on the far left of your computer, there's a microphone. Okay, we're going to come back to you, and I'm going to ask Mark to unmute and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to join you. My name is Mark Newhouse. I live in Florida now, but originally we lived, when we came to the United States, we lived in New York. I was born in a displaced persons camp in Germany, 2 years and 1 day after Mom was freed from Auschwitz and my father was freed from Buchenwald. I knew almost nothing about my past, except that the giant shadow of the Holocaust was always hanging over me. But my parents were very busy as new immigrants. They were fighting to take care of us. My father was working very, very long hours, and they were also fighting with each other. They had a terrible marriage. My father was a very difficult human being. I do know that we came from Lodz or Łódź, Poland. But what I did not know until I was almost 70 was that Łódź was not Anatevka from Fiddler on the Roof. It took me all that time to realize that it was a ghetto established by the Nazis. And it was actually their first, I guess, killing machine for Jews. When I discovered it, which was by accident, I felt that I had to share that information with my children and grandchildren and future generations. And I had always spent a lot of time as a teacher and as an author of children's books. And I was so busy creating fantasy monsters and trying to live my life in America that I almost forgot about the real monsters in my life until my mother was asked to speak to Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. And then what happened was, instead of me interviewing her, she gave an interview to a college student, and she had one line in it that really caught my attention. And that was the line that she said saved her from going to Auschwitz for many, many months. And that was she was working in a warehouse, running her hands over clothing, flat on the clothing, and turning in any valuables she found. And so what happened was I wrote a story and I entered into a contest. And unfortunately, when the judges announced that I had won, they said, "This is an amazing work of fiction." Well, when that happened, I realized that I'd made a very serious mistake because I knew so little about what my parents went through. And so I arranged to set up an appointment to see my mother, who was living in Miami. I was living in Florida, in a place called the Villages, which is where I am now. And it would take about 4 hours to get down to Mom. But I said, "Look, Ma, I'm going to interview you and I'm going to do this story right." Unfortunately, about 2 days before I was to go down, I got a call from my stepfather, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, a survivor from Sosnovich. And he told me my mother was in the hospital. And my wife and I raced down to Miami, but we were 10 minutes too late. And I not only lost my mother, but I also lost the story of her survival. After she died, I learned that she had given me a gift. It was the chronicle of the Lodz ghetto. And I sat down on the floor for 3 days and read it. And I said, I have to share this somehow with my children and grandchildren, because I felt guilty that they knew so little, and it was my fault. But I write children's books, so I didn't think that I could possibly do this. But I sat down at my computer, and Jeffrey knows this story. And if you want to know more about this story, you can go on, I guess YouTube, is it, Jeffrey?
Right.
And you can learn this story because I did have the privilege of sharing it earlier. But basically what happened was I sat down at the computer, and in 30 days, I wrote 700 pages. It took me about 3 years before I had the courage to show it to anybody. And then I published it, and it has won a number of awards, including international awards. And I'm proud to say that we just finished a pilot script for a possible television series. So keep your fingers crossed, because I think it's so important to share these stories and inspire other people to share their stories as well. And I thank you, Jeffrey. May I share the name of the books?
Oh, absolutely, please. And I would love
The
for you to
book,
put it into chat so everyone else has, and to
I'd
speak.
be honored to do that.
If anybody
The
else
book,
has written creative work that you want somebody to see, please identify it in the chat by telling us where to link to it. Go ahead.
the books are called The Devil's Bookkeepers. The first book is The Noose. The second book is The Noose Tightens. And the third book is The Noose Closes. And when I read the reviews, that we were about to hit 500 reviews, which is amazing for an independent book. When I read the reviews, I get tears in my eyes. And I think to myself, well, maybe now my parents who passed away before they could read my books, maybe they'd be proud of me at last for coming to terms with my past.
Well,
So
Mark would never blow his own horn, but I know your mom is very proud of you because in New York, Mark was the teacher of the year as an educator, and he is a tremendous amount of work to bring children education. So congratulations to you for that honor. And I want to give Tony, want to try again? I don't want to drag you. Talk. No, talk now.
Is it okay?
Oh,
You hear me?
we have liftoff.
I am actually a 3G Holocaust survivor child, but if it wasn't for my genealogy, I would have never found cousins that were alive of my dad's that survived the Holocaust. We have a cousin in Israel who her dad, she had a few siblings, but her dad took her to live with the aunt and uncle when things started to get rough during World War II. And by the time he went back home to Smorgon, Poland, the family was gone. So she lived with her aunt and uncle through the war, but the way they lived through the war was every time the Nazis got closer, they would move again. And they did that the whole entire time during World War II. They just kept moving and moving and moving. And that's how they survived.
Okay, and where are you based now?
Where do I live?
Yep.
I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
I used to live in Allentown.
I know, I think I told you that I knew you lived in Allentown, right? Right.
And how about your husband, Gary? He just left the screen. I saw him leave. Does he have a relationship to the Shoah?
He probably does, but at this point he really doesn't have much information. My maiden name was originally Danishevsky, and my grandfather had 7 siblings, but just he and his twin sister survived, and a few nieces and nephews.
Okay, and how did you get to the United States? How did your parents? What was their journey to get to?
My parents were born here. In Trenton, New Jersey. They were both born in Trenton, New Jersey. And my grandparents, they all came separately before they got married. So it was prior to World War II, quite a ways prior. My mother's father, his name was Beyer, and he was one of 10 children. And he came here before a lot of his siblings were even born. And they were from Prusiny or Rusny. And my maternal grandmother, her maiden name was Wine, W-E-I-N. And she was from Lida. She was from Lida, but some of the family was from Eshishak. They lived in the Professor Yaffa's from her book on Eshishak. I'm probably not pronouncing it properly. But she also came as a young girl, and they first went to England to stay with a relative until her dad had enough money to bring the family over.
Got it.
And Yeah, and that's
I'm glad to hear you and to meet you finally.
thank you. One
And
other thing I do want to mention though
Sure.
is while I was doing my genealogy, I came up with my grandmother, my paternal grandmother's family tree, and one of her cousins was Sonia Boldo. Sonia Boldo married Zeus Yabilski. He was one of the brothers who saved Jews in the forest, in the Nalibaki forest during the Holocaust.
interesting.
And
Amazing.
we have coincidentally, my oldest daughter has met their son Jay.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Well, I'm going to turn the mic over to Devora.
but it
And
was
Devorah,
nice chatting with you.
Nice chat. We'll do some more. Don't worry. And okay, Devorah, don't go. Keep your mic on so you don't have this problem again. So let's just stay quiet. Just stay quiet. All right, Devorah, your turn.
So in line of serendipity of how people connect, we lived for 35 years in Manchester, Connecticut, and moved to Shrewsbury, Massachusetts just 2 years ago. And it was during COVID. And one person from the synagogue reached out to me and has been calling me every week to find out how I'm doing. And her name is Sherry Espy. And she is Jeffrey's sister. And because of Sherry, I have met this group and I'm very grateful.
It's amazing. Amazing.
And Sherry is a sweetheart, just like you.
My mom always would say, always, I'm such a mama's boy, and it was all about my mom. So go ahead, tell us about yourself.
Well, there's so much to say. I guess a couple of weeks ago, I turned 80, and as a gift to myself, I decided to do a storytelling legacy project. I worked with Jennifer Zunikoff through the teachtheshoah.org group. And so I have a 40-minute monologue that I did where I turned the story of my grandparents on its head. And just today, before I came on here, I was talking to my sister Barbara, who said to me that she always cried when she thought about Fritz and I, our grandparents, until she heard my story, when I sort of filled in a lot of the missing pieces and turned it into a love story. My grandparents loved each other very much from the time that Ida was 16. And I sort of brought them alive. And so one thing was great for me to be able to do the research and share the story. But the other thing that I was able to help my sister and actually my daughter, Sarah, feel a living connection to these people who died 80 years ago. So Ida and Fritz, I know Tibor said, you're from Czechoslovakia. I'm from Czechoslovakia. My family is from Czechoslovakia, 500 years in Czechoslovakia. My father was a psychoanalyst, and he knew something. He knew something before other people did. He knew that he was going to have to leave Czechoslovakia. And he sent my mother to England to learn English soon after they got married. She didn't like it, but she did it. She had my mother do research to find the cousin who had been kicked out of the family, given a one-way ticket to New York to get my parents a visa. Anyway, he knew. And so he was ready when the Munich Agreement was signed. And my dad was from Reichenberg, Liberec, which is the Sudetenland. So in October of 38, my dad became a German Jew. And German Jews, unlike Czech Jews, could come to America. Or I guess it was part of the Munich Agreement that if you were a Jew trapped that you could come to America. So my dad was organized, and 3 months later, he and my mom were on a boat to America. But I was raised, without family and without. This is complicated because it's.
Well,
We're talking about.
Why don't you do this? Why don't you put the link of your story in the chat, and then people can actually get the whole picture.
Okay, I just want to say that this group was advertised as transgenerational trauma, and I have been traumatized from the word go. I would say from my mother's milk, even though it wasn't clear to me when I was 3 years old, and the telegram came that from the one surviving cousin that everybody had been murdered, and my mother had a nervous breakdown. And I sort of lost her, and my smile couldn't change that. And I would love to be able to try to touch that transgenerational trauma. That when I gave my talk, I started off by apologizing to my children for having inflicted guilt on them. My mother felt so guilty, and I felt guilty, and I've transmitted that to my kids. And when I turned the story into a love story, I was hoping that was somehow magically going to make a difference. So it did a little bit, but not totally. The trauma is still there, and I would be very, very grateful to work with people on touching that trauma. I probably do need to write a book, but anyway, I'm grateful to be part of this effort.
One of the things that I can counsel all of you, and it's very personal. I mean, those headaches that I talked about early on were with me my whole life until 2019, when I met the San Diego Generations of Shoah group. In 2008, my sister Sherry got my parents to write a narrative about their life story, and my sister dictated it, recorded it, and then transcribed it. And in 2008, she sent me the Word documents, but I never could open them because I was so traumatized by what was never told to me, because my parents never talked. My mother did have her tattoo erased, and she had a big scar on her left arm here. Let me see here, get over here. And I always noticed that from the moment I was born. I think, what was. And when I touched it during my bar mitzvah lesson, she absolutely gave me the eye daggers that only a mother can do to a son. I was frozen from those daggers, and I never once ever asked her again. So I never read a Holocaust book. I never watched television, never watched a movie. I never watched Hogan's Heroes. I never went to saw Schindler's List. But something happened in 2019 when I went to meet Rita and everyone else. There were 50 people there, and I realized as I started to meet people that some people talked with their parents, and some of their parents didn't. Some of their parents had trauma, and they had trauma, and so I started to link my trauma to their trauma. And when I went home that night, and for the very first time, I just was so restless I couldn't sleep. I woke up at 3:00 in the morning, and I went to my computer and I opened my parents' life document for the first time since 2008. And what was interesting, my father's document was very detailed. He's German, my father was so German that when I decided to ask my father how to draw a straight line, I would just hand draw the line across the piece of paper, and my father would really get upset with me. He said, "That's no way to draw a line." He takes out his right angle ruler and he lines it up completely at a 90-degree angle on the left side of the page, and the T-square goes over there, and he draws the line that's perfectly, he said, that is how you draw a line. And my sister has my father. So you know, Sherry, that's my father. I am my mother. Okay. And they are completely different people. But when I started to lean in and want to learn about my parents' pathways, which I didn't know, my headaches went away. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but literally in 2019 through 2020, I no longer had a headache, and I haven't had a headache since. And that's because I'm starting to take the burden off my shoulders that I had all these years. And so this is an important segue. So I'm going to take a break now. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to play something for you, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it afterwards.
No, centuries. We're talking my mother's lifetime. You know, we're not talking about hundreds of years difference. And if history repeats itself, what makes 30 or 40 years ago so different from today? It's really not. So we have a TV instead of a radio. Big deal.
So it still might happen.
I expect it to happen. I'm ready for it to happen.
After all has been said and done, do you have any fears at all being a Jew today?
You always told me that, Shelley, it can happen again. Shelley,
I just
want to
know how you feel. In other words, I don't want to feel guilty that I had put a load on you, you know, because of my experiences.
Well, you did. You did. You put a load on me.
I felt I put you and Dad through a lot of things. When I used to get in trouble, you shouldn't feel guilty at all, because this is part of growing up, and you were just, you just had problems like other people had. I used to steal the car all the time. Well, not to steal it, to take it, but this wasn't... I really stole it. No, you took the car away for a day or so, but this is... Well, it was more than a day, it was more like a week. To take the car from a father is not called stealing.
We're almost there. We're not quite there yet, but we're almost there. A few more years.
Oh, you'll get there. You'll get there.
I'm glad you're telling me this now, because you always put it down. Shelley, why an artist? It's not enough money.
Well, that's I put it down not because of art itself, but because of the struggle. Because it takes an awful lot of stamina and power and, you know, to make it in the art world. I didn't want to see you suffer in order to get somewhere.
You asked me before, why did I have to leave home?
Oh, yes, yes. Not you didn't have to. That's
why I had to. What, you don't think I had to.
Right.
But I had to. You didn't push me around. You just put everything down that I ever did. If I wore red, why aren't you wearing blue? If I wore blue, why don't you wear red? If I talked on the phone, like, get off the phone. If I'm off the phone, why don't you call your friends up and go do something? What are you here for? And you didn't mean harm, I'm sure of it, but the kid in me was having a hard time. You said you didn't want me to struggle.
Well, do you think that it has anything to do with my past?
When I was a kid, I cried. Why won't my mother help me? Why won't she be there when I need her? My friends from high school would say, boy, I wish I had your mother. Whenever I have a problem, I go right to her. You were there for people's problems. You were very giving and very, but when I had a problem, not now, I'm busy, ask me later, I have to go to work.
I plead guilty, yes.
To not being there when I needed you?
Yes, yes. But it had nothing to do with you, it had to do with my feelings. Because mentally, I wasn't ready to accept and love someone or something. Because through my experiences, every time I loved someone or something, I lost it. I still lived every day like, did you ever see someone at a railroad station with a suitcase and going somewhere? Well, my life at that time, when I first got married and had children, I still was at a railroad station, still going somewhere, not knowing where. I know now that I was afraid to give my all, so I tried to keep you at a distance, so I wouldn't get hurt again. Because I went through loving my parents and losing them. All the people that I would be in camps with and love, the next day they were gone. In the camps, you learn to just look out for number one. And you learn that you couldn't love because it would only destroy you. So even it carried over. When I got married and had children, it actually carried over that feeling of, you know, if I love too much, I'm gonna lose them. I love you.
Okay, very, very powerful stuff. Now, this is the movie that I provided, and I think it would be helpful for you. It was very helpful for me to watch this film, to not be able to speak to my parents, like Mark indicated, but to see how survivors thought enabled me to somehow bridge and link my parents and the questions I never got to ask them. So I'm going to ask all of you, what brought you here today? What was your goal and what is your mission of being here today? And I'll start with Rita.
I have been going to second generation groups ever since I was I think 35 or 40. And I have been to conferences. I lived in different places, and this is not my first time discussing these issues. It's, everybody has such different experiences, and it's very interesting to hear them all. But the one thing I think we share is that we grew up with, I'm talking about the second generation, we grew up with somewhat of mystery, broken lives, darkness, lots of tears, crying, nightmares. I know my mother did. Not everybody had that, and a lot of parents were hiding things and didn't want to share because, obviously they didn't want to hurt their children. But we share. That's what we share, is this past that's difficult. And so I grew up surrounded by survivors and survivors' children. So I always seek that out because it's comforting to me. So that's my only interest, is just to talk.
Did your parents talk or keep things quiet?
My father talked a lot, but my father wasn't in a camp. That doesn't mean he didn't suffer. He did, but he almost starved to death. My mother also almost starved to death, and she almost was killed when she had typhus and couldn't work. But my aunt, who was with my mother during the whole time, she talked. And they never made a video, but my aunt made a short audio, and that's the only thing that I have. The rest is like, I have spaces of blanks that I have to try to fill in. That's about it.
Okay, and Tibor, what are you thinking about after you see that film clip? You are a survivor, and what brought you to our Havurah today, and what are you looking to get out of?
my intention by looking around and not seeing any improvement in people looking at Jewish tribe, Jewish religion, or Jewish traditions, anti-Semitism is not diminishing, it's growing, which means that what I was then trying to start doing about a few decades ago was to educate mostly high school people, high school students, and whoever asked me to talk, I went to talk. I developed a slideshow. Last year, we wrote a little book, looks like that, where it's my painting in it. It has 110 pictures and 30 pieces of my art, which is eventually describing through emotional way, as an artist way, my story and story of a survivor. 5 or 6 of us survived, and about 70 died, were murdered, were taken to all kinds of death camps and murdered ruthlessly. My story was appeared in a documentary movie in 2015, about 7 years ago. Canadian Slovaks produced a documentary movie called, if you go online and type in SPITZ, Spitz, DVD 01, 3 words, SPITZ DVD 01. You can see the movie, it's in Slovak language and English subtitles. This year, 2022, in April, PBS purchased a movie made here in Kingston and several other places close by, which is called We Remember. We Remember Songs of Survivors. Several survivors received a song about their stories. The song was publicly produced, publicly performed, and it seemed to be as valuable as it became, so that it became eventually a video and then a really documentary movie. PBS purchased that movie in April, was shown on 350 PBS stations across America and Canada, Europe, and so on, whoever Israel bought it. Which means that what I'm trying to say is I try to educate people that Holocaust not only happened, it was another first part that people consider this very talented tribe as some kind of a competing danger to themselves and try to slow us down, wipe us out, and things like that. And what is my message is that it can happen again. Naturally, it can happen again, and we see in our days, these days, such a rise of anti-Semitism. I remember before I was kicked out of school, and 2 years later, the cattle cars started going into Auschwitz and other places, which means that my message is a warning to people not to be complacent, not to believe in some kind of a good luck and so on. If we don't protect ourselves, if we are not aware of possibilities and don't remain strong and fighters, we might lose a lot of people again. And a great danger of American Jews is that 80% probably in 1 or 2 decades be gone because of intermarriages and people not having children, Jewish children and Jewish grandchildren anymore. Which means that the 20% is a survival rate. And it's not good enough. And this is another message where I'm trying to inform people about the beauty, usefulness, and extreme revolutionary ideas of Judaism. And this is what is, I consider my I will call it mission in life, or some kind of a purpose of life. And I'm preparing to turn this small one into something larger as I see Mark has behind him, which I'm a little envy to do that. But I'm not as skillful in English language and not as efficient in putting together things like that. I would appreciate a sponsor or some kind of a help in that field.
So I
This
wanted
is my story.
Yep, I wanted to look. I'm really honored that you've come because I have seen We Remember on PBS. I read about We Remember being in Kingston, and the fact that you're here from Kingston and you're in that film. I think I want to. I'll send you an email separately. Each month I put on an event for the larger Jewish Culture-Holocaust Remembrance Group. Many people here have been invited and come. And I think you would be a program that would be highly sought out by our group. And so I want to talk to you about that. So I'm thrilled that you've chosen to come. It's serendipity that you're here and that we connect in ways that before I didn't know. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tony. You are into this topic. You're 3G.
I have done youth work for a very long time in Jewish youth groups. I spent a year in Israel, and my husband and I have been very active in different organizations, and we are very active in a oral history World War II group in our county, and we do have Holocaust survivors that speak. And we read a lot of Holocaust books. We have a huge library, a huge Holocaust library. My father's mother and father had a very hard time when they got married, because when they found out about their family that didn't make it in Europe, they were devastated and they wouldn't talk. And it was very hard. And it got to the point where my parents didn't want us to go to the house because if we would ask questions, they wouldn't say anything. And all of these different things sort of sparked our interest. And also living in a small Jewish community where we have Amish and Mennonites, it's a little different. People do ask us questions and things when we're out and about. So, and I also feel that all of these stories I want to hear. It's very important to hear everyone's stories and how they survived. It's very, very important. None of us should ever forget them.
And what was your career?
I had a few different things. I have 4 children, and we have one who's had a lot of health problems through the years. But I was an administrative coordinator of a Jewish day school here. And I also ran youth groups for USY and then later on for NCSY, for the Orthodox Union. Just being active in the community, really.
Okay, Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question.
So I am drawn to this topic in community. I feel like as I become an adult and I'm the adult in the room, I'm not young, but I'm, I guess middle age or thereabouts.
Are you willing to tell us how old you are?
I'm in my 40s.
Okay.
So, I work in schools. I look ancient to these kids. Work in preschool up till junior high school age. And it became so important, or it was apparent to me that I needed to help facilitate these discussions and pass on this information. If it wasn't for me or other people, these young people wouldn't know about this. Our history, our shared history. It doesn't have to be the Holocaust, but I also help people, young people, for example, work on their family trees, because I feel like one of the topics I teach is modern Jewish history. It's in a book unless we connect it to our lives, and then it becomes something more meaningful. So all of these things together just I feel compelled to be a part of these conversations, and I feel like the that hourglass, the sand glass, the time is ticking, and so I'm trying to grasp onto as many stories and meet as many people, because I feel like I need to, but also I want to. So that's what drawn me to be here tonight, and just in general to these communities and conversations. And my goal would be essentially just to connect with people, hear stories, and hopefully be a part of the community, whether that's helping others, connecting with others. Again, I do these, I run these programs with survivors and their families. So I'm always looking for speakers as well. It's just something I volunteer do. Again, it's nothing I get paid for, but it's just
And
love these connections. And
do your parents associate with the Holocaust in some way?
When you say associate,
well, are they connected through family to the Shoah, or are you sort of taking the baton and the torch and leading where you're?
I've learned there's like always at least maybe, or at most, or sometimes at least one family historian. I don't consider myself a historian, but I'm that, lay historian, the person who is kind of trying to do this work. And so I think through that, it's helped my parents reconnect with their families. We found some family members that my mother, for example, I think hasn't seen for 40 or 50 years. And my father, we're meeting family members he's never met before or known. I never knew them. So I think they're becoming interested through this work, or more interested, because it's always been a part of their lives. My father, his parents were Holocaust survivors. This was his life. He didn't have to necessarily be connected with others to have this, the connection to the Holocaust. For me, I essentially have to actively seek it, because it's not something that I've lived, as Rita said, directly as a 2G, for example. Yeah.
Okay. And Devora, give us your reasons for wanting to be here, what your mission is.
So I've been connected to Holocaust education for a while. When I took my mother to Prague, or she took me, but I sort of had to force it. And we met the surviving cousin. Gerta gave me her yellow star, and I've taken it to fifth graders who were reading the book Number of the Stars, and I would put the yellow cloth star on my, on my chest like this, and then I would have a pretty piece of jewelry that I would hide under my shirt, and I would ask the kids to tell me the difference between those two stars, and I would get some very interesting comments, and usually it would end up talking about bullying. But
do you recall a comment?
Well, one of the this fifth grade teacher, Martha Di Giovanni, my friend, gave me a book called Fill Your Bucket, where all the fifth graders signed how my story filled their bucket. So it was like, how could they? But because I inspired conversation, it wasn't, at that point, it wasn't a monologue. It wasn't just me sharing. It was me engaging the kids, and they were actually talking about their own lives. So I think it's always good when it's a Pandora's box. And sometimes when you open this Pandora's box, you can't put it back together. And sometimes that trauma can go out there in the universe. But I have the feeling that when we talk about it, when we take it to kids, that we're actually part of the healing process. But one of my personal healing things is being able to storytell, to being able to animate the conversation. I mean, I'm now in the animating my grandparents, Ida and Fritz, into a love story, and seeing them as people rather than that as tragedy. And it's a work in progress, and I will love talking with you. I will love talking a little bit to Tibor about Czechoslovakia, because when I went there, I felt like I was coming home to a place I'd never been before. It felt very, I don't know how close you were to where my dad was in near this, what they called the Sudetenland, Liberec, but I guess it was the mountains that apparently very beautiful.
And
Spent
Tibor,
15 years in Sudetenland. 15 years after the war.
15 years after the war, what? You were there?
I worked in Sudetenland.
You worked there.
and have you gone back to you've gone back to Czechoslovakia several times?
Yeah. First of all, we tried to find the place where we were hiding in the forest. We dug out a hole in the forest, covered it up, camouflaged it, and spent 7 months under the snow, ice, and patrols were all around us to find where we were hiding. Didn't find us, but Ukrainian partisans who parachuted behind the enemy lines robbed us and almost lined us up to be shot, which means that it was like living like forest animals being hunted in the hunting season, which means that we try to find the place, because the forest, it was a lumber industry, they were cutting trees, and the geography changed, which means that for 5 years we were coming back, and we stopped at COVID. 2019 was the last one. We found the place in the forest. It became some kind of a pilgrimage, school children going there. Every year I gave them a 1 hour lecture with about an hour debate, Q&A sessions, question and answers. And in the place where I was born, North Slovakia, when I was 90, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they made me an exhibition of my paintings taken from a museum where I donated them, which means that it was like a homecoming, except, what is called mixed feelings. The generation of their grandparents did the terrible crime of deporting people, knowing that they'd be killed, murdered, and the grandchildren now totally innocent, regretting it, or at least showing some kind of sympathy to Jews. And I'm standing there, and they ask me, "Can you forgive us?" And I'm telling them, "I have nothing to forgive you. You are not part of the crime. I cannot forgive the murderers. Who am I to forgive if somebody else was murdered by somebody else? Nobody appointed me a judge, but children of criminals are not guilty. According to Moses' law, everybody is guilty for his or her own crimes." And I hug them, I love them, I cooperate with them, and we contribute to museums and cemeteries and this and that, which means that, but my message basically, and I'm going to stress it, you ask what would be in one sentence some kind of a message. My message is very strange. Don't cry over the spilled milk, bring a cat. Out of this tragedy has to be something positive, has to come out of this tragedy. And it was not a tragedy, it was a huge crime. And we have to learn the lesson. Israel was created in spite of all the opposition, and it exists only by strength, not by weakness, not by collecting sympathy, or not by collecting some kind of crying, sitting on the floor lamenting. This is not the way we should handle this issue. And this is what I'm trying to induce into people, and I produced a lot of people who are aware of the tragedy and handle it with strength. And this is what I'm doing also in the old country where the crime happens, in a short sentence.
So I have additional question for you. You have Naomi on the book,
yeah,
with you. Is Naomi also a survivor?
Yes, she was 22 months old when the war was over. I was 15 when the war was over. It's about 14 years difference between us. We have been married for 55 years.
It's wonderful.
Wonderful. Is Naomi still with us?
Yeah, she is.
Okay. Well, next time you have to bring her in and sit her next to you.
Thank you.
So I'll leave you, Mark, with the last words because we're coming to the end of the program. So I know Tibor is a very tough act to follow. So, but I know you're a challenge. So go ahead.
I remember when I was a little boy that my whole life seemed full of mysteries. I would go to people's homes and see behaviors that were totally different than what my parents would do. For example, anytime we went to a restaurant or to a party, Mom would open up her purse and would whip out the aluminum foil, wrap up the food, and shove it back into her purse. No matter how much money she had, that was always the way it was.
I think Rita's connecting with you. I see Rita's laughing from ear to ear.
But the thing that people don't understand is, and I think it's so important to understand this, is that as a child who knew so little, you don't really understand the mentality where the Holocaust to your parents is so much worse than any other suffering any other people have ever had. Now, that's an interesting idea, and I want to leave you with that for a very important reason. As a classroom teacher in elementary school for 32 wonderful years, with over 1,000 of my sixth grade students on Facebook with me, even though I've been retired 23 years, so some of them are in their 60s, the question always came up, how do you teach about the Holocaust? Now, I taught sixth grade, and the Holocaust, and I've said this to Jeffrey, was mentioned in one paragraph in the social studies textbooks near the end of the year. So when you mention Number the Stars, that's certainly one way of doing it. The problem is when we take the Holocaust and say it as an isolated historical event, it loses the focus that we need today. It is a symbol of hate and prejudice and irrationality unleashed. And when you think about I had a college professor ask me, and I said this to Jeffrey too, why is it that the Holocaust stands out compared to other genocides in history? He said, look at the African Americans, look how they've suffered. Look at the Native Americans, look how they've suffered. And yet we as Jews, we think the Holocaust, which happened almost 100 years ago, is so much worse than everybody else suffered. And my father actually got into an argument with my father-in-law. My wife is not Jewish, but with my father-in-law, who was in England during the Blitz and lost most of his family there. And my father's argument was nobody suffered as much as the Jews. And I thought about this college professor's question, and I came up with an answer finally. The answer is, if you think about the Holocaust, it was the first time, and hopefully never again, where state-sponsored murder was successful in killing 6 million people of one religion, race, whatever you want to call Jews, okay, within a very short period of time, from 1939 to 1945, 6 years. And Hitler, in the middle of a world war, devoted his best minds, his money, trains, resources, and sacrificed cities like Lodz, which was creating industrial materials for his military, because of his hatred, irrational hatred of Jews. And that's something that we have to understand, okay? That's what makes the Holocaust such an unprecedented event. But we cannot deny the fact that there have been other genocides, and we must use the Holocaust with future generations, not as something that happened 100 years ago and only to Jews, but as something that teaches the entire world what happens when we allow hate and prejudice to be unleashed. And believe it or not, there are Jews who have that hate and prejudice too.
May I comment?
Absolutely. You
No,
never take an easy route out, by the way.
just the difference between Jews and the others. The most obvious difference. Not a single Buddhist was killed in history or during the Nazi era because a baby was a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu. But Jewish babies, 1 day old, were murdered because their grandparents were Jewish. This was a
You're
huge
absolutely
difference.
correct.
This
But I'm
was
going
a
to
huge
stop you.
difference.
I'm going to stop you because I'm going to stop you, sir. Tibor, I agree with you 100%. There is no argument there. What I'm trying to tell you is 100 years from now, 100 years from now, even 30 years from now, even now in schools, if you want to teach about the Holocaust, okay, you have to look at how you can reach teachers, children, and make it relevant to them. And that's one of the things I'm here for. So what you're saying is absolutely true. I'm the first one to agree with you. In fact, if you read my books about the Lodz Ghetto, you will see that if I had been born 2 years earlier in the Lodz Ghetto, I would not be here now. My goal is to learn how to teach future generations about the Holocaust as a symbol of all the hate and prejudice unleashed.
Yes, but I have a comparison. Why children or school students hate the best student? Instead of learning from the best student how he studies, how he perceives the knowledge, how he absorbs wisdom, instead of it, they hate him because he's better than they are, or at least, which means that this is a story of that little tribe started with Abraham 3,800 years ago. And it's an outstanding tribe, very smart, wise, and educated people were stressing, observing that this little tribe brought to humankind morals, ethics, awareness of justice. Let my people go, outlawed slavery 3,300 years ago, which means that it's an outstanding little group, which is a outstanding student in the class who is hated, which means that how to teach people to lose their emotions and start thinking rationally, I don't know. Nobody has succeeded yet to overcome prejudices, which is emotional, and replace it with some kind of rational thinking. If we succeed in that, anti-Semitism would vanish. And not only anti-Semitism, but hatred of different groups or races would vanish. But humans have been developing, this, I call it human race, was developed with certain properties, with certain competition, to fight nature, fight each other, fight other species, and so on. and that
I
envy
believe that.
and jealousy is built in us. And who succeeds in taking it out would solve problem was anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a mental disease, and this mental disease cannot be wiped out through rational means. I don't have the answers, but I'm working on it.
Good. That's exactly why I'm here. See, Jeffrey, you should have started with me. I always cause you mischief.
I absolutely enjoy the scholarly discussions we are having. It's really the reason why I love putting these programs together, to bring such an eclectic group of people together under one Zoom roof. And I really want to thank you all for participating today. So I have a few questions. We want to understand from this group, since this is the evening group, what is the right frequency that you would like to continue having these meetings together? Is it monthly? Is it every other month? I'm looking for you to make some suggestions. Okay, I'm going to suggest that we do this every other month, so that we have a time to think about it. I get to play with my passion of providing you film choices that not necessarily talk about the Holocaust, but also talk about things for us to think about the world. I have one for you to listen to on Netflix. It's currently in release. It's called The Swimmer. It is about Syrian immigration in a story told that is tremendously emotional. So I will write to you that, but I give you that as an assignment for our next meeting. The other thing as I want to let you know is that I've recorded this, and these are part of the recordings that help us together teach the lessons of the Holocaust. And that is a reason why I do record this, so that our children's children will be able to hear Tibor, and we'll be able to hear Devorah and all of us talk about the Holocaust, that it actually existed, that it isn't deniable. And I do that to honor my parents who were survivors as well. So the other thing I want to mention is, what was the third point? We talked about the time. I would like this Havurah to grow, but only through you. So if you have a person who you want to intro and invite to join us, that is how this group will grow from referral and networking. So you have the ability to invite anybody you want to. The next meeting will be on a Wednesday. Again, I'll just look at the date right now, so you can have it. So 2 months from now, that would be February the 15th, which is a Wednesday, at 6 o'clock. Now, you also can have the opportunity, if you are retired and you're not working, we also have an 11 o'clock in the morning session on Pacific time. So you can go either where, as well as the 11 o'clock group can come into the our time frame too. So we want to eventually have everyone meeting each other, which is, I think, a very fabulous way to grow the group. So you can invite whoever you would like to join us, and that's how the group will grow. So thank you for spending a very interesting evening together. We all know each other a little bit better than we did when we first started. And I know that the thread of our Jewish connection and our 2G survivor connections make this all an amazing journey. So thank you very much. We'll see you again. And we have another program on July 15th. That's our live Zoom that I will invite you all to come, and you're all on our notification list, so you'll be able to see that. And Tony,
I thank you. I thank you for
January, not
Right,
July.
thank you.
January, yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all.
Take
Thank you
care,
for
everybody.
including me.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
Be
you.
well.